Hello, this is Jason from Liberate Raleigh, and welcome to another Liberate Raleigh video. Since I'm sure you're aware it's currently election season, there's a presidential election this year, I thought I'd talk about a particular topic that might be of interest, and that would be voting and the political process in general. So the reason I'm doing this video is I just want to give a quick little overview and explain why it is that I do not vote and why I do not support voting. So I have a number of different things I want to go over, so bear with me while I have my phone here with my topics outlined. So stick with me while I periodically keep track of what I'm covering. So voting, like I said, I don't vote. I do not support voting, and I pretty much don't agree with the idea of democracy. So I'm going to cover why the main reason why I don't like democracy first. Okay. The reason why I don't like democracy and voting is what is right and what is wrong, what is immoral, what is criminal. Justice and injustice is not determined by majority vote. The mere fact that a certain group of people constitute a majority within a given geographical region and have voted for something in no way means that what it is that they voted for is right. For example, if a group of people voted to kill somebody, that would still be murder. It does not cease to be murder simply because people voted on it. So obviously this does not change the moral nature of given actions. Another problem here is what is the geographical area that constitutes who votes. In most areas, that is governed by a certain national government that is overarching over states or provinces or commonwealths, cities, counties, whatever. But the truth is, those borders on the map are arbitrarily defined. There's really no rhyme or reason for any of them. Why can't I just mark off the property lines of my apartment complex around here, where I live, mark that off and say, you know what, I'm a majority of one, what I say goes. And not only that, the majority forces, but through majority vote, the government ends up forcing these decisions onto unwilling participants. So what if I marked off the territory around my apartment complex here, or my apartment, said I'm a majority of one, now I'm going to go out and force my ideas on everybody else. Does that somehow make it right? Does it make it good? No, it doesn't. That's absolutely silly. And it's obvious when you put a random person into these scenarios that the government does, that it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that the government does this and gets away with it, and nobody points at them and says, oh, you're a criminal. You're engaging in criminal activity. So that's the first point. Democracy in voting does not determine justice. It does not determine what is right or wrong. So that leads me to a second point here. This is the way that a lot of people try to get around the whole voting does not determine what is right and what is wrong. They say that the government rules through the consent of the governed. And by consent of the governed, what they mean is people have consented to what is referred to as a social contract. There is a problem though. There is no evidence whatsoever, none, zip, zero, zilch, that anybody agreed to any social contract at any point in history. There is no evidence that it was voluntarily agreed to, as opposed to a gun being put to everybody's head and being forced to agree to it. One argument that people try to use to get around this is they say, well, You could move away. You could move to another country. Nothing is stopping you from moving. So you voluntarily agree. There is a logical problem with this argument, and it's a little bit subtle, but I'm going to explain it. It's begging the question. If you're not familiar with what the phrase begging the question means, it means the argument is circular and the argument assumes that which it tries to prove. So let's examine the statement, you could move away. Implicit in that statement is the belief that the government has the right to force you to move away. The government only has that right if its authority is legitimate. Its authority is only legitimate if you have agreed to the social contract in question. Therefore, it assumes the social contract was voluntarily agreed to in order for it to be a valid argument. Hence, the circle is therefore closed. We went around in a circle. We were attempting to prove that the social contract was voluntarily agreed to, and we went right around and we've verified that the argument assumes that it was agreed to in order for the authority to force people to move outside of the geographical boundaries of a given nation is legitimate. Okay? So that's one way people try to get around it, but obviously that is not the case. Okay, there's another thing that people try to use, another argument they bring up. They'll bring up an example of, say, a restaurant. When you walk into a restaurant, you don't agree via, say, a signature to pay the price of the meal that you buy, but you agree to the rules of the restaurant simply by being on the property of the restaurant. So, this argument is also circular because the restaurant owner has a legitimate property claim to that geographical area. That's the first thing. So, in order for this to be valid, you have to assume that the government already has the property claim that you're trying to prove it has. So again, you end up in the same place as previously, running around in circles, assuming that which you're trying to prove. All right? So, one final thing on this. While there are circumstances where signatures are not technically required, it does strike me as a little bit silly that something as important as signing away your individual sovereignty, your right to property in yourself, to govern yourself in your own actions, that you don't need to have any sort of physical, actual evidence of this. That just strikes me as bewildering, that you don't need that in that scenario. Something that important. When you buy a car, there are contracts and paperwork that needs to be filled out to verify that you're actually engaging in that transfer. When you're buying a house, all these different activities that you have to engage in, there has to be some sort of evidence that you actually agreed to it. But when it comes to the government telling you to do whatever it wants you to do, no, you don't need that. That strikes me as absolutely ridiculous. Okay? So, next. Here's another reason why I don't believe in voting. As we've already established, governments do not govern based on consent of the governed. So how do they get away with doing all this stuff? Why don't people just storm the gates and, burn the White House, burn the Capitol buildings down, and just take back their liberty and their sovereignty? Well, that's because voting is a con. Voting is a scam to get people to think that they're actually consenting. it gives them the illusion of choice when in fact there is no choice. So when you vote, you are participating in that system. You are helping to strengthen that illusion of consent, which does not help your situation at all, to say the least. It doesn't make any sense to assist the government in its ability to force its actions upon you and to strip you of your liberty. So I don't, and another very important thing to remember here is this is true regardless of who you vote for. But I'm going to cover another topic in just a second here regarding who you vote for. But there is no distinction as far as who you're voting for that makes this invalid. If you vote at all, then you contribute to the perceived illusion that the government governs via consent of the governed. Okay? So again, not a great thing. So just think about it. Let's say a scenario, a presidential election, where 90% of the people voted. The government could say, yeah, we now have a mandate from the general public to do what we want to do. Now, let's say instead of voting, you refrained from voting and you spent your time convincing people of the criminality of the government and the scam that is voting, and you started convincing people that this was a bad idea, and they also stopped voting, to the point where 1% of the people voted in an election. Now, obviously, that government could not claim any sort of a mandate. The truth is, if you could actually convince people to agree with you, and only 1% of them voted, the government would have been dissolved long before then. So that's a much better use of your time and effort than participating in what amounts to a scam, an election process that you have no control over, that is controlled by the political establishment. So yeah, that's just not going to work. Now, as far as who you vote for, a lot of people will say, well, you should vote because you have to live in the real world and the government is going to govern you regardless of whether you vote or not, so you might as well vote and try to get somebody who is just a little bit less awful in there. Vote for the least evil candidate, the least bad candidate. Vote for him. Vote for the most libertarian candidate. There is a number of problems with this. First of all, that assumes your vote really contributes to the outcome, which mathematically it does not. The probability that your vote will be the deciding vote is infinitesimally small. So no, your vote isn't really going to count at all. Another thing, you cannot vote in a sort of self-defense manner such as this. And the reason why is self-defense is something that you can only legitimately use against a particular person who is committing an act of initiatory violence against you, somebody who is aggressing against you or your property. You can only use force against them. By voting for a candidate, you are supporting and helping somebody get into office who will engage in criminal activity against innocent bystanders. You can't just say, well, he'll be better than the other guy, and so I want him to get in there. You have no right to actually subject third parties to any sort of aggression in order to defend yourself. So you can't make this argument on self-defense from self-defense grounds, because it's invalid, and that you can't just use self-defense against third parties. That's an act of aggression against those people. So that is that doesn't work. The other thing is, so let's consider this this long-term strategy of voting for the least bad candidate. the least bad candidate over time is going to get continuously worse. That's because the political establishment that runs elections, makes the rules for elections, make the rules to favor the majority, the large political parties, the Democrats and Republicans. They're the ones in charge. If some third party actually gained enough influence that they displaced one of those parties, they would pretty much just become indistinguishable for all practical purposes from the party that it replaced. So these people are making the rules, and they deliberately make these rules along with the the mainstream media establishment, to exclude anybody that would make any sort of positive change. Pretty much the best candidate in my lifetime was Ron Paul, and while he did win his congressional seat, he was one person out of hundreds. His influence was negligible and insignificant, and he never came anywhere close to winning the presidency. Not even close, because the system is designed to prevent people like that from actually winning. So participating in this scam is only hurting yourself. Elections are iterative cycles. Over time, the system will incrementally become worse. To look at the long-run dynamics of this, think about the least bad candidate from 100 years ago, and compare that to now. Compare the size of the government 100 years ago to the size of the government now. Obviously, it's much larger, much more tyrannical than it was back then. So this strategy is a losing strategy. In fact, the system pretty much banks on you engaging in it. That's the whole point. They want you to vote. They don't care who you vote for, because the elections are set up so that an awful candidate is guaranteed to win, regardless of how you vote. So it doesn't matter. In the long run, voting for the least bad candidate means you're either voting for one of the large party candidates who are virtually indistinguishable from each other and are completely in control of the political establishment, or you're voting for a candidate such as perhaps Ron Paul, who has no prayer of ever having any sort of influence over the government. So it's a losing proposition, and over the long run time period, things just gradually get worse. So voting for the least bad candidate isn't going to work. It's not going to help. So let's say you, I have one last thing here. Let's say you decide, well, elections and voting, I'm going to use this as a platform to evangelize my point of view. I'm gonna vote, and I'm gonna get people to try to think about the ideas of liberty and self-ownership and property and peace. That's what I'm gonna do. I don't actually have any illusions that my vote counts or that I will influence the political system. I'm just going to use it as PR. It's a PR campaign. Voting in elections are PR. Well, the problem here is you're arguing against the political establishment while simultaneously participating in it. You're arguing that the political system is corrupt, it's criminal, and should be done away with, at the same time that you're running and or voting or participating in it. That undermines your message. Your actions undermine your message. That weakens the strength of your arguments. So I don't think that this is the best way to go about convincing people. I think that the best way to do it would be to reject the political process completely, reject voting, use yourself and your actions as an example that people can look to. They can look at you and say, this person believes in what they are saying, and they have rejected the process and they do not participate in it. They don't give in to the scam. They don't help to support the illusion that people are being governed based upon their consent to the system that governs them. That, to me, in my mind, is the stronger case to be made, as opposed to participating and through your actions undermining the argument that you're making. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I tried to cover all the topics that I could think of that were relevant to voting and elections and participating in the political process or not participating in the political process. So I hope that this has been interesting and enlightening, and I'll see you in the next video.